108. Your Ukraine war update. Days after Trump cut off all military aid and intelligence to Ukraine, except for Musk's Starlink enemy locator, hundreds more Ukrainian soldiers are dying on the imperiled front, and massive Russian air attacks on civilian targets are devastating undefended Ukraine. Exactly as the new Trump-Putin military war on Zelensky's nation and America's 10-year, now former ally, intends. Today, Musk tweeted, "Ukraine's front lines will collapse without my Starlink. A clear threat to withdraw it. Only ethically criminal, as neither Congress nor Ukraine were paying for it." Trump's tweet, "Even full treaty handover of Ukraine's mineral wealth won't get them the ceasefire. They have to give up more stuff." Musk, Trump, and Putin pile on together to shake down Zelensky. What won't you hand over to keep us from enslaving and killing Ukraine, not to mention machine gunning Volodymyr Zelensky? Well, it's not like father and son Trump did not work intimately with American and Russian mobsters for 60 years straight. Senator Lindsey Graham tweeted, "Trump 28, the third term forbidden by the Constitution that no legislative bodies, federal or state, will amend." Trump's move will likely be to overturn the 2028 Democratic landslide with martial law, 2 years ahead of his stated plan to end all federal elections by 2028. King for life until cheeseburgers totally clog his coronary arteries. If American democracy survives Donald Trump, a gigantic if, every law I demand from you will be needed to end the predator's power, to end us, end our world and support system. Your NPR Insomniac's latest interview was with Madeleine Baran. Watch her podcast, In the Dark. She has spent years investigating war crimes. Over decades, 850 complaints of wrongful civilian deaths were pressed against American armed forces, who have always exercised the dubious responsibility for investigating themselves. To no one's surprise, 80% of cases are dismissed after cursory look-sees. Of the minimal number found any culpable responsibility, penalties nearly always compare in severity to parking tickets. Machine gun 500 villagers at My Lai, South Vietnam, for a bit of jail, but that's about it. Among the 300,000 Iraqis killed by the American invasion to prosecute the lie that they had and aimed at us chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons of mass destruction were 23 civilians shot in Haifa by U.S. troops enraged against every resident who could have been guilty of killing several American troops with a roadside bomb. One innocent grandfather named An walked into Haifa from another town, looking for his missing sons he feared might have died in the American onslaught. American troops, assuming that any Iraqi wandering near was a terrorist returning to the scene of his crime, put a massive exploding bullet in his brain. An, not dead yet, was carried by crazy brave Iraqis to a private home. American troops entered the home and carried An to a military medical helicopter. I'll leave you to speculate on their motives, ranging from compassion and mercy to fearful guilt and cover-up. On the helicopter, An was turning blue and gray. The chief medic handed an EMT a breathing bag with oxygen and told him to give him air. The private protested that everyone had told him that this was the bastard who set off the bomb that killed Americans. Hell no, I won't save him. Let him die. Another troop was found to squeeze the ambu bag. An made it to a hospital. Before long, he was medevaced towards another hospital, but died soon. His family only knew that he had been taken away alive by U.S. forces, just no subsequent end to the story of his survival or death. They spent the next 20 years begging the American military to tell them what they knew. To 1 of every 100 questions, the Army actually answered nothing. 20 years of lies. They knew everything. Upon his death in U.S. Army custody, An's body was delivered to an Iraqi morgue. For years, 300 Iraqis, nearly all civilians, killed every single day, so overloaded morgues that many bodies beyond storage capacity were dumped back out onto urban streets, while many others were taken to graveyards for burial, often not identified, much less released to relatives. The morgue's Iraqi staff felt like white-hot knives every unknowing family's endless pain, left for years in the dark, explaining researcher Madeleine Baran's podcast title. They knew that no family would ever recover any of tens of thousands of bodies dumped, burned, or rotted away, but many more were buried, most in graves marked Prisoner of War number 8, as was Mr. An. Someday when this hell on earth ends, the staff told each other, families will never stop coming here to beg us for information. So on every day of 1,000, morgue staff took a photograph of every deceased and also maintained records of every body delivered to grave sites, reported to them with enough specificity to find them in the future. Madeleine Baran's vast years of Iraq investigation research, thousands of interviews, tracked An's every destination and experience, alive and dead. She learned that the American military's chain of custody, medical care, oversight of Mr. An's death, and his specific delivery to the Hadifa morgue was available to each of the hundreds of soldiers who denied knowledge of any of this for 20 straight years to An's desperate relatives, still holding out hope for his survival. They, like Madeleine, heard stories of his terrible head wound from an American bullet, just no final testimony of his death, only his evacuation while still alive. When Ms. Baran learned of the morgue's incredible photograph and grave delivery records preserved decades after the war, she contacted the family and invited them to accompany her to the morgue to look for their grandfather and father's picture. They found it, fatal head wound as clear as his facial features. They are now working to get him exhumed for a hometown funeral and burial. His relatives had seriously considered not striving to confirm his death, perhaps far more painful than hoping another decade for him to walk into their door and arms miraculously alive. But they knew better and jumped at the chance to find his body. They cried many rest-in-peace tears with Madeleine, thanking the 20-year researcher, actually an angel in a woman's body. The purpose of invasion, not home defending armies, is to kill everyone considered the enemy. very few civilians from border to border escaping suspicion. Even during the last 300 million slaughtering century, dropping millions of 2,000-pound bombs manufactured specifically to obliterate entire cities, leaving a minimum of survivors, there were examples of just, not unjust, invasions. 2 million American troops on D-Day punched into Nazi-savaged Europe from the Normandy beachhead. Their several years' slog towards Germany was confrontation of the true, inhuman Nazi invader. Their rescue day, however, turned to bestial night when Harry Truman and General Bombs Away Kurt LeMay firebombed millions of women and children to break the will of Adolf Hitler, who was presumed to be civilized enough to surrender to stop it, more than Harry and Kurt, who would not. You remember my story of World War I's General Billy Mitchell, who designed the terror bombing of civilian innocents that went on to become Total War's full strategy for each of the next 100 years of industrial strength genocide. Before I wrap up with your laws to stop all this, Trump and his Secretary of Defense have just weighed in on the issue of Army responsibility to intentionally minimize collateral damage, harm to and death of civilians, God forbid, on purpose. The Pentagon has always had a number one inspector general charged with investigating all Army action improperly harming or killing anyone not the armed enemy military. Trump fired him, not to be replaced. The Pentagon has always had a department staffed to take complaints from anyone in the world who came to them with reports of Army killing of innocents. With Secretary Pete Hegseth's encouragement, Presidents Musk and Trump destroyed this bureau to the last man and dollar. Mr. Hegseth told us exactly why they did it. There is no such thing, he said, as war crime. We make our own rules and law. Decades of mighty invader America's refusal to join or adhere to most international war crime tribunals prove that Mr. Hegseth's savagery is not freakish poison, but standard policy. Mighty China's Uyghur Holocaust, Russia's Ukraine Mariupol murder of 50,000, Israel's 100,000 Gaza slaughter, and Saudi Arabia's 2,000-pound bomb murder of Yemen, and American weapon 15 million, mostly civilian butchery, all prove that the purpose of giant armies is to turn earth into hell for the innocent, making the devil's sizzling of guilty, goddamned corpses mighty tame by comparison. And your little job? Turn this weird nut job's disarmament and army reduction to equal modest border defenses only into God, humanity's, and your family's justice and rescue. An hour after Vatican white smoke announced his cardinal selection, the new Pope Leo XIV spent his new first public minutes rhapsodizing about world peace, saving our world, now fighting more and worse wars than ever. So what? 10,000 years of keep every soldier and weapon, just pretty please don't use them, had slowed the billion corpse slaughter not 5 minutes. But guess what? A man a billion times more inspiring and powerful than Stevie Nobody has my utterly insane dream until you realize it. After appealing, as usual, for every peace-loving world citizen of all faiths-loving support, he got to his unheard-of point. This peace, this human decency, not to mention survival, would only be achieved accomplished by a disarmed world. Bombs keep exploding until there ain't none. Militarism and the weapons business, not the coerced triggermen, are war. 1 million of my vastly more eminent listeners all ask for an audience with him and hand him a copy of our disarmament treaty. Throw your glory behind peace law, your holiness.